So welcome everyone. I know that we all probably running in between things, and if you're anything like me, you're probably juggling a lot, and maybe even thinking for the thing that you have coming up next. So let's maybe just take a moment to arrive together, maybe just have a pause, take a breath, take a stretch, whatever helps you to land in the space. And to help you with that, I'd like to read a few lines from a poem. Start close in. Don't take the second step or the third. Start with the first thing, close in. The step that you don't want to take. That probably captures the place I left off before I entered into the world of executive coaching. This webinar is about identity. It's about moving through transition. And I think at its core, it's about self-discovery. It's really important to understand ourselves as coaches because we can't really separate the person we are from the coach that we are. So whether you're a coach or a leader or deciding to become a coach, my hope is that my story will spark something in your own story. So I'm going to take on the role of storyteller and share with you my journey. For argument's sake, let's call it a mystery series. That's definitely what it felt like. And I'd invite all of you to take on the role, not just as listener, not just as attendant, but as an investigator. As I share my story, I invite you to look for clues, not only about me, but clues about you. What resonates with you? What questions start to emerge for you as you listen and lean in? What parts of your identity are shifting? See where these clues and questions that come up for you may lead you in exploring your identity and self. My story is on the surface about moving from an HR executive in the corporate world to an executive coach in the coaching profession. But that's on the surface. Below the surface, it's about connecting what's happening outside of me to what's inside of me. And at its core, it's a story about identity and self. So 3 years ago, I left my corporate career to become an executive coach. And I thought that that was pretty straightforward, but something much deeper was happening. You see, without the title, without work, which had taken a huge amount of my time and my energy, without the solid salary, without the cloak of corporate leadership. Let's say it like this: the ground beneath me started to shake. It was stepping away from work and stepping into what felt like nothingness. And I felt naked, honestly, exposed. I mean, if I wasn't who I was in my work and what I was doing, then really who was I? And that's a real question I was grappling with. But before we go into the depth of that, let me share a little bit more about me. So if I look at myself through the lens of social identity, you can see it on the screen. You'll see that I'm a woman. I'm 49 years old. I'm the firstborn. I'm a sister. I'm a South African. I'm of colored heritage. And I use the word colored very specifically within the South African context. I know that there are different connotations elsewhere in the world, so it's very specific to South Africa. I was raised Catholic and then in the Saved Church. There are parts of my identity that I've chosen. I've chosen to be a mother of 4 beautiful children. I've chosen to be a wife, married for 28 years, and I chose to move into the religion of Islam. I also chose to be an HR professional, and that led me to becoming a global worker, not only in South Africa, but in Singapore, in Dubai, in Germany, and now in Portugal. I also chose to be a citizen of the world, and I chose to be in the profession of executive coaching. And of course, last but not least, I chose to be a cat lover of 2 British short-hair cats, who are really my joy. But at my core, I'm an optimist. I love learning and I love stories, in case you didn't get that already. I feel deeply, and I've been known to be a little bit on the dramatic side of life. I have always been drawn to helping others, and that's really been a real core part of me and who I am. So I feel really at home in the world of coaching. So the first question I would pose to you, fellow investigators, is if you had to create your own social identity map, what would be at your core? Which parts have you been given? Which parts have you chosen? Is there one identity that feels really central to who you are? But this in itself is not the full picture. Let me take you back in time to 2019, the version of me then. It's late at night. I'm in my hotel room in Dubai. I've just landed from another flight from Germany. My inbox is overflowing. I feel the stress right now, honestly. My mind is racing. Lots of decisions, a restructure happening in the background, performance calibrations, endless meetings. I'm working 14-hour days, yet I still feel behind. I'm doing a lot, but it doesn't really feel like it's enough to cope with everything. I should feel successful. But instead, all I hear is this deep whisper inside of me saying, is this it? I mean, really, is this it? At the time, I had just stepped into a global HR VP role, and that meant that me and my family had to move to Germany. And for the coaches on the call who do transition coaching, you'll recognize that I faced a number of stack transitions, right? I was moving from a regional role to a global role with an increase in complexity. I was moving from a market-facing role to a headquarter role, losing my closeness to the business, but having to up my influencing skills. And I was facing a very big cultural adjustment, moving from the multicultural world of Dubai to a much less international and I would say diverse Germany. And I was shifting from a very successful, thriving business region to a central headquarter role that I would describe, from my personal opinion, as a turnaround role. So there was a lot going on. If that wasn't enough, I was also double hatting my own role for 7 months, juggling between 2 bosses, a reorganization, and a really relentless pace. And then COVID hit, and there was no slowing down, not for anybody. if you look at it from the outside in, if you look at it on paper, I was at the peak of my career. Actually, after that first year of performance, I actually received my highest rating within the company, the highest rating possible. But that same year was the year that I decided to walk away because suddenly success, or at least the idea that I had of what success was, just didn't sit right. It didn't feel right. This didn't feel like success, honestly. So this version of me, the overachiever, the problem solver, the perfectionist, um, was the version that I carried into the world of coaching. And when I stepped into coaching, something strange happened. Honestly, I really felt stuck. And that was really surprising because I'd built my career on leading, solving, executing, dealing with a lot of uncertainty in very dynamic markets. I was responsible for Africa, Middle East, Russia, India, Turkey. These are not the most stable markets in any region. So I was used to dealing with uncertainty and volatility. But moving from crisis to crisis is a different way of coping with uncertainty. This required me to sit with my own uncertainty and to sit still with it. And that was really foreign to me. And that's where the real work began. That led me to my dissertation at Ashridge. I was already in my first year of the master's program at Ashridge. And it led me to this question. A big question. What does knowing all parts of me mean for my sense of identity? At that moment, I really felt not grounded. I wanted to use the word unstable, but I don't want anybody to think that I'm an unstable person. It felt unstable. And so this was the departure point of my inquiry. And what I can't do today is condense a 12,000 word dissertation into the time that we have. But I will focus my learnings on 3 core themes. Before I do that, I'm not an expert on identity, and I promise not to throw a whole lot of theory out there. But I just want to share that in the background, shaping this very deeply personal inquiry into myself and into my coaching practice was the Gestalt concept of self. And the key points I would pull out is simply that it's not fixed, that self is relational, that it emerges, that there's this sense of movement and fluidity, that it's never static and it's always evolving. And that honestly was really the sense of myself and my experience with the world. So that was sort of the theoretical frame in the background of my inquiry. But let's go back to the story. The 3 themes that transformed my understanding of myself were around 3 really core parts of me: my roots and racial identity, what I will call my relational blueprint, and my relationship with myself. And that's what I'd like to explore together with you today. So the first theme was really around roots and racial identity. That's what it looked like on the surface. And why was that important? In the professional world, I often found myself in between. Sometimes I would describe it as on the outside looking in. I was often the youngest, often the only woman, and more often than not, the only person of color around the management table. And the truth is that I honestly had a very conflicted relationship with my racial heritage. So growing up, I had, in my mind, created this idea of what does it mean to be colored. Again, colored within the South African context. And this was mostly shaped by the neighborhood that I grew up in and by the experiences that I lived through in my life. I saw poverty around me, domestic violence, substance abuse. So in my head, I internalized the belief that what it means to be a respectable professional or a successful person does not equate to looking like somebody like me or coming from a place that I came from. Nobody gave that to me. I gave that to myself. So I distanced myself, you know. I have this beautiful curls, which I've embraced. But years ago, I straightened my hair for a long time because this bushy part of me didn't feel that welcome. I adjusted my accent. I still struggle today because when people listen to me, they say, where are you from? You don't really sound South African. And then sometimes I really sound very South African. And I can't even explain it. It just feels like maybe that's how I should speak when I'm in my professional setting. And I curated myself, my dress, my speech, uh, my presence to fit into what I thought was expected, respectable in corporate spaces. So I rejected the colored part of me. And so when I started this inquiry, that felt like it had a lot of energy. And so I decided to dig a bit deeper and understand what did it really mean to be colored. I traced my roots through stories from my aunts on both sides of the family, through a book that had been written by someone in the family. And I learned that my great-grandparents were colored, Xhosa, Indian, from India, British, Mauritian, and St. Helenian. I had the full rainbow within my family tree. When I listened to the stories, I heard them told with pride, but also with a sense of shame. You know, some stories were louder, they were clearer. Other stories had big gaps. They were missing pieces of information. There were no records. And all of that was shaped, obviously, within the context of apartheid. But in all of that research and understanding and investigation, my biggest surprise was my own shame. I realized that I had avoided speaking about my background because I didn't want to be judged for it. I recall, you know, a leader that I really respected jokingly saying to me, you know, on one of my promotions, that my promotion looked really good on paper. You're young, you're colored, you're from an emerging market, you're Muslim. So many boxes I seemed to tick. But I didn't want to be known in that way. So I pushed all of those things that other people may attribute things to far away from me. And as I dug underneath the surface, because it really felt like that, I discovered that trying to understand my racial background was this deepest search of trying to belong to something. And Brené Brown describes this really beautifully. She describes belonging as a primal need. It's like you can't really choose, do you want to belong or not belong? It's like instinctual. It's like driving in the background. And she says that we will do whatever it takes to belong, even if it means betraying parts of ourselves. And I saw that in my own journey, rejecting parts of my colored identity to fit into my own self-created professional ideal of what success and being a respectable professional look like. So what does that mean for my coaching? You know, if I had spent years rejecting parts of me or not speaking about them or hiding them or just not bringing them fully with me, who was really showing up in the coaching room? Which version of me showed up for my clients? And that was really my growth edge. You know, when I started my coaching business, I remember there was a workshop in Ashridge and different coaches came and I asked the question, you know, what is the need for coaches like me? And I was surprised that I actually asked the question because what I was really asking was, you know, is there a need for coaches that, you know, come from a third world country that are, you know, this color? You know, that's not the spectrum of coaches that we see today. On the one side, I asked the question. On the other side, I knew deep inside me, I didn't want to be known as a diversity coach. I didn't only want to have that attached to me. And so I really steered very clear away from marketing myself or positioning myself in that way. But honestly, when I looked at my clients that I was supporting, many of them sought me out because of my background, because of my business experience, because I was, yes, from a third world country, so to speak, because I was a woman in leadership, because I was a mother, also building a career. And so now, you know, I can stand now and look back and realize that I am more than any one part of those things that make up my identity. So what I bring to my coaching is all of me. And so I don't have to attach myself to any of those parts, neither reject any of those parts. But I also have to remain alert. So oftentimes in coaching, you know, somebody who may have a similar social background or racial background or, you know, just gender or family situation will say to me, Melanie, I don't have to explain this to you. You know exactly what it's like. You know what it's like. You've been in those rooms. You know what it's like. And honestly, it would be very easy for me to nod and agree and say, yes, yeah, I know. Because I do often see parts of my own experience in theirs. But coaching isn't about that. You know, we have a responsibility as coaches. It isn't about keeping everything at ease. You know, a coach is there to be a mirror, to challenge, to hold a space that can really stretch and widen perspective. And so instead of assuming, I often ask, well, what is it that doesn't need to be explained? Let's talk a bit about what is it? You know, what's that thing that you believe I would understand automatically? Because very, very often, what looks very similar on the surface has layers of nuance and meaning and personal interpretation below the surface. So my question to all of you, investigating into your own space of identity, is how has your racial or cultural background shaped how you see yourself in your career, in your leadership, in your coaching practice? The second theme I'd like to share with you is around the roots of my relational patterns and what I called my relational blueprint. So when I researched into my family line, I noticed that there were signs of broken attachment on both sides of the family. Not only broken attachment, but also generational trauma. So it wasn't surprising for me that when we discussed attachment theory in the Ashridge program, it felt very prickly, is the best way I can describe it. Like something I didn't want to touch. I learned that my own childhood was shaped by what Hodgkin would call, or they call, frightened and frightening caregivers. And that resulted in me having an insecure attachment style. And suddenly, in that moment, a lot of things made sense. This constant hypervigilance, checking the surroundings, really being attuned to body language, to the tonality changes when people are speaking, to, the facial expressions, to just really having this constant awareness of cues and adjusting to them. Adjusting, so I think that I could feel okay and everybody else could feel okay, right? I could keep it nice and safe. And I think this hypervigilance and people pleasing sort of became part of like really deep parts of who I was. All these things have challenges, but also gifts. I think one of the gifts I got from this in the corporate space was, it was very easy for me to read a room. It was very easy for me to read people. It felt very natural. It was really easy for me to deal with some of the toughest, most challenging leaders in the organization because I almost seemed to anticipate where things would go. But what it also did was that when I did feel maybe a little bit unsafe or anxious, or maybe when I feared rejection, I would retreat. And that became a pattern, retreating into my mind, into fantasy, or into the future, keeping it positive, keeping it moving, or retreating into books. You can see I love books. So into the world of imagination, basically reframing things so that I could stay in control, that I felt a sense of control. So instead of opening myself or allowing myself to feel fear or even anger, I focused on smiling, staying positive, and taking action. And that strategy worked, but it couldn't work forever. So what did it mean for how I showed up in my coaching? I noticed that whenever I felt stuck as a new coach, when I started practicing, whenever I felt stuck, and those moments happen in coaching where you just don't know what to do next, how to help the client next, or what to offer, or I felt anxious with that stuckness, I did one of two things. I merged, so I joined the client with whatever it was they were bringing. So if they, were sharing something deeply emotional, I really met them there very empathically, but I also sort of lost my position as a coach. Or I moved away to the next thing. I sort of moved us on. And my supervisor at the time, he said, Melanie, what's really going on when you get so busy? When you start doing stuff in your coaching, what's happening, right? And that's what was happening, the anxiety of not knowing what to do, but knowing what to do next. I start like, okay, so either I meet you where you're at and I'll join in your experience fully with you, or else I'll just keep it light and keep it moving along. And so I learned, that in the Gestalt school of thinking, I learned about what does contact mean, and contact is when we are interacting with each other. So two people are interacting with each other. They enter into the interaction. There's a reason. They are meeting each other in that space. They are receiving what it is or getting what they need to do in that space, and they are completing their contact before they move on to the next thing. And I learned that what I was doing was actually called modification of contact. And this joining others or getting busy and moving away and on to next things, these were creative adjustments. This was how I dealt with my own anxiety in that moment. And so that was like a key in a lock to understanding my pattern of relating with others, right? And that was an old pattern. It was a childhood pattern, because what happens when we are doing these creative adjustments, the main thing is, how do I get what I need? If I need to be accepted, if I need to be appreciated, recognized, loved, whatever the thing is, we sort of adjust ourselves to get that need met. And that's what was going on with me. This was a huge, huge realization. So my work became, when that happens, this is an old childhood pattern that's playing out here. What do I need to do to stay in contact with my client, that I keep in the dance of communicating and meeting each other, right? And that meant I had to stay with the stuckness. I couldn't move away. I had to sit in it, and sitting and staying with the stuckness, with the anxiety, if that's what it was, opened up the space. And what I learned here was probably one of my most important learnings, because it was, how do I connect back into my body? How do I be present and connect back into my own experience of what's happening with me now? And how do I use what I'm feeling right now? That, hey, I'm really nervous here. I don't know where we're going to go next. I'm not really sure. How do I use that as information to offer it into the coaching space and invite something from my client? So I think staying with stuckness, leaning into it, and using it as an exploration was probably one of the biggest things that I've learned. And I had the reflection, a lot of us coach leaders, they're also leaders in the webinar. And if you think of how do you lead, when you are anxious, when you are stressed, when you are under pressure, when you react with people pleasing, with demanding or domineering or pushing or whatever the behavior pattern is, what is really going on? Is it being present with the situation right now? Is it a learned pattern from the past? So I think my question of inquiry that I would leave with all of you is, what relational patterns from your past might still shape how you coach or lead today? The last theme that I'd like to share with you is my relationship with self. Remember, I spoke about this picture or this idea that I had of what it meant to be a colored person. Then I had this, ideal image of what a respected professional was. And when I transitioned into coaching, I really created another one. Despite my learning, I repeated a lot of patterns. I created a new ideal, and that was the ideal of the ideal coach. And just like before, I measured myself up against it. And, the inner critic, always there in the background, showed up really loudly, right? It was always telling me when I was too directive, disclosing too much, maybe mentoring instead of coaching, maybe advising instead of coaching. It was like I had my own inner coaching police constantly monitoring everything I was doing. And what I realized was that I was striving for perfection because I was fearing scrutiny and I was fearing judgment on my coaching, fearing on whether my coaching was good enough. So what did I do? Honestly, I played it safe. In the first year of my practice, I think the first 9 months, I only worked with practice clients. I hesitated to coach in front of others. In a coaching in group supervision, I froze. And it took me the remainder of the program to go back to group supervision. So when I really thought and inquired about what was going on with me, I realized that this wasn't about coaching. It was about a really, really old belief. You know, this belief that if it's not 100% correct, then it's not good enough. And there was that feeling of shame again. Because what I remembered was the shame of achieving 97%, which today I would say, wow, 97%. That's what I would tell my kids. But instead, what I heard was, where's the other 3%? And so I realized this 3% was the cost of perfection for me. It was this constant shadow of shame in the background. And so fear, perfection, shame, they were like this merry trio dancing in the background together with my inner critic, and letting me know every single time I stepped off course. My coaching felt rigid, it felt controlled, and it felt boxed in. And so this inner critic just had way too much power. And one of our supervisors at Ashridge, he calls the inner critic the itty bitty shitty committee. And that really helped me to laugh. Those of the AMEC group will understand who I speak about, but that made me laugh, right, at my inner critic. But it also helped me to see in that humor that actually my inner critic had really helped me massively. It had really been there all along the way, you know, as I was striving and growing and excelling and building in my career. And actually, I could thank it for a lot. It was part of my story of success. I was in a group supervision session once, and I had the role of shadow supervisor. And that was a really interesting supervision because the coach who was coaching knew I was there and she could call on me if she needed, right? And that analogy stayed with me. And it was part of how I reframed the relationship with my inner critic. I thought about it as my inner critic's always there. Actually, I really appreciate it because it helped me to get to where I am today. And so I thanked it. I thanked it. And I also told it, I know where you are, exactly where you are, and I can call you anytime I need you and invite you in when I need your help. And then I put it aside. And that may sound really, really silly to you, but that simple act was liberating. And suddenly in my coaching sessions, I found really free, experimenting, playing, leaning into curiosity, holding things much more lightly, and most of all, not afraid to fail. So for the first time, the inner critic went a bit quiet and silent. So self-acceptance was the biggest part of resetting my relationship with myself. In the corporate world, it's easy to measure how are you doing? Are you successful or not? So much is about good, you know, or not good enough. But in coaching, it's really different. It's very hard to measure how you are doing, right? Because it's not about you as the coach, it's about your client, right? And so what I realized is that I had no control over, my client's success. All I could do was bring all of me, all of me. That included the parts of me that were perfectionist, that were controlling, that were fearful, that were shameful, that were playful. I could bring all of them into the coaching room, and that could create the space for clients to do the same. And the only thing that I could pay very close attention to was the quality of our connection and being present with that. So I really had to shift from striving to control and know I was doing well to trusting and being present and taking care of the quality of the connection. So I think that's the question and inquiry I'd like to leave with all of you co-investigators is, what parts of yourself have you set aside to fit into a role or into your coaching? And what would it mean for you to reclaim them? What I realized in summary was that when I was doing my best coaching, which felt effortless, actually it felt like I was doing nothing, which if I have any clients on the line, I am doing a lot, so please still pay me, but it's not striving, it just felt like it was coming very naturally. And I learned something from Nobantu, who has developed an Ubuntu coaching model. And she has an Ubuntu mantra, which reads as, may we see more, hear more, love more, illuminate more, be more, do less. And I realized that actually, when I'm truly coaching from my heart, when I am truly coaching being fully present, that's what I'm doing, right? So being just me and bringing just me, all of me, to my coaching practice, I have to say, felt a little bit of an anticlimax at the end of my 12,000 word dissertation. But I think it speaks to the point of authenticity. Just being who I truly was more than enough for what I bring to my clients. And so we can't really separate the person from the coach. So when any of us enter the coaching room, we don't leave the person outside and bring the coach inside. These are two sides of the same coin. I think that's been my biggest lesson. The best we can do as coaches, I would extend that to leaders, is to widen our awareness, to try and understand what's more in the unconscious, bring it up into awareness, and be aware of what's really driving and shaping us. The last part I'd like to leave with you is that, in the coaching world, we talk about using ourselves as instruments. So in the coaching space, of course, we bring the theories and the tools and the models and things that we've learned, but actually our biggest instrument is us. And that's where our biggest responsibility is how do we tune ourselves as the coaching instrument. And so, of course, the gift of my master's experience at Ashridge was doing this really deep inquiry, which helped me to understand myself better, which helped me to understand the coach who I am, which helps me to bring an authentic me into the coaching room. But I still need to keep the muscle of tuning the self, having a good reflective practice, taking care of myself, not doing the old Melanie way of, working crazy hours, not sleeping enough, not eating enough, wearing it all like a badge of honor, like you do in corporate, but really actually taking care of myself so that I can be the best for the person in front of me in the coaching room. And of course, leaning into supervision. None of us know everything. And in supervision, we have a beautiful, loving space where we can, bring our challenges, share, what's working, what isn't, and learn and develop our practice further. So it's been a long journey. The last 3 years have been really transformative, but the journey didn't end there. So nine months ago, I faced a serious health challenge, and 3 months ago, I finished surgery and treatment. And in that experience, I felt the shift, that shifting ground beneath me again. But this time, something was really different. Instead of the inner critic showing up, the inner coach showed up. Of course, I was afraid. I was really scared, but I was also really curious. So instead of sitting with the question, why now? I've made so many changes. The question I sat with was, what is this year to teach me? And I remember that in my master's dissertation, the marker had said he still felt that there was a need for further integration. And I have to say that was really true. But I wouldn't call it integration. I would call it really a return fully back to me. Because this health crisis knocked again on old patterns, having to control, wanting to do it all on my own, being strong, seeking validation. But this time I let go. My husband led. My children helped. I asked for help, and more importantly, I received and accepted help, which is something, old me wouldn't really have done. But what I noticed in my practice was that I usually close my sessions saying, what stood out for you today, or what are you taking away from today? And suddenly I noticed that I was asking, with a bit of a statement and a question was, I hope that was useful for you. And so, this continuously evolving self, it's shifting all of the time. And these challenges that come, knock on our old patterns. And so again, that need for validation came up. So I noticed it, and that's when I truly understood that this is a lifelong journey. It doesn't stop just with these experiences. I'm blessed that my inner critic turned into my inner coach. That was a transformation of itself. And what I'd like to leave with you is that, this journey of growth, it never ends. But if we take care of our own awareness of ourselves, it can change everything. So thank you for your time, for your attention. I'm sorry, I realize I've spoken way too much. I really appreciate you being here, and I'd love to continue the conversation.